The moment I was reborn, given a second chance, I knew exactly what I had to do. I had to save Ethan Shaw, the man who had once left me broken, who had led me down a path of regret and sorrow. But this time I wasn't going to follow that same road. No, I was going to change everything. Back then, life and death were in fate's hands. Wealth and honor were up to heaven. But now I knew the truth. Bridges belonged to bridges, roads to roads. We were never meant to walk the same path. That's why, the moment I returned, I ran straight into my mother's arms. She was in the kitchen, cooking, and the smell of home filled my lungs like a long-lost memory. I held back the tears, but my heart was aching. In my past life, my parents had been too proud to embarrass me. After I left with Ethan for the capital, they only came to visit twice. The first time, they wore brand new clothes they'd bought in town. They brought wild pheasant they'd hunted, black wolfberries they'd picked, dried mushrooms and fresh fruits. They traveled all that way just to attend my wedding. But the Shaw family saw them as nothing more than country folk, nothing more than a disgrace. I'll never forget how my parents stood awkwardly at the door, trying so hard to be accepted. For my sake, they lowered their heads again and again, saying, "Lena is a good girl. You're a respectable family. We trust you'll treat her well." When they left, they held me tightly and whispered, "Sweetheart, now that you're married, don't worry about us anymore. Just live your life well." I knew then they were afraid Ethan's family would look down on me, that they'd always be seen as beneath us. The second time they came, my aging father carried my sickly mother all the way to the capital just to see me one last time. I still don't know how he managed it. I remember turning a corner one morning and suddenly feeling like something had been ripped from my chest. Later I received the news. Both of them were gone. Neighbors told me my mother had developed a tumor. In just 6 months they had spent every last penny they had. The train fare was scraped together by kind neighbors. And shortly after they returned home, my mother passed away. My father left behind a small sum from selling their old house for me. They had me late in life, and I never gave them a moment of peace or joy. In the Shaw household, I was mocked by anyone who pleased. I served Ethan's parents, raised our son, and took care of my husband. The only thing anyone ever praised me for was being hardworking and capable. Yet not one bit of that effort was for someone who truly cared for me. Even in the end, the only hint of regret was when my son said, "It's such a pity Mom died too early. She didn't live to see her granddaughter." What he really meant was he lost someone who tirelessly looked after his child. The Shaw family, each and every one of them, held themselves above others. I spent half my life entangled with them, and they spent that same time despising me, yet relying on me all the while. Clearly this was my misfortune. Perhaps the heavens heard my bitterness and gave me another chance at life. This time it was only for my parents. Now, in this new life, my mom was mildly annoyed at how clingy I was being. She told me to go knead the dough, and I obeyed without a word. She teased that I must have been possessed, since I used to whine, act spoiled, and always find ways to avoid chores. When I heard my dad had returned, I dashed out of the kitchen like a shot. But the moment I saw who he was pushing in the cart, my face went pale. Lying on the hay was none other than Ethan Shaw, unconscious. I clenched my teeth so hard they nearly cracked. If I had known, I would have pushed him into the river and let him drown. "Sweetheart, come give your dad a hand," my father called out. Chased a rabbit down the mountain and ended up picking up a man instead. Dad had already applied herbal medicine to his wounds to stop the bleeding. Ethan had been running for his life, pursued by someone trying to kill him. He'd been stabbed twice, once in the shoulder, once in the back. The original bandages had torn during his escape, making the wounds look worse than they were. Luckily there was no fatal injury. With fresh bandages, water, and food, he'd recover. But I couldn't let Dad find that out just yet. I pretended to help support Ethan and slipped a badge from his inner pocket. "Oh wow, Dad, look at this. Doesn't it look like something a soldier would wear?" Dad squinted at it. Then his eyes lit up. "He is a soldier. I saw guys like him driving military trucks through town. It looks exactly the same. Joe Miller, did something amazing today, he said proudly. Saved a soldier. He turned excitedly toward the house. Let's carry him inside. Honey, go kill a chicken. He's seriously hurt. We need to nourish him. I stood there stunned. I had forgotten that Dad was a total patriot. Any soldier in his eyes was a hero defending the country. I quickly tried to stop him. Dad, he's clearly not just some regular soldier. What if he's on a secret mission? It's not safe to keep him here. Let's send him to the village chief. He can contact the authorities in town. Their place is a lot safer than ours. Dad thought about it for a moment, then looked at me seriously. Sweetheart, you really think things through better than I do. I sighed inwardly. My dad's such a kind and honest man. He even went to the trouble of layering more straw over Ethan Shaw to hide him before taking him to the village chief's house. The chief didn't ask a single question and accepted him right away. When I got back home, I was relieved that I'd finally gotten rid of that hot potato. The chief's daughter had already married off long ago. If Ethan felt the need to repay someone, he could find another way to do it. I started making plans to earn some money, buy study materials, and apply for college. In my last life before I married Ethan, I had only completed high school. But after moving in with the Shaws, plenty of people mocked me for being uneducated. Ethan told me to attend night school and promised to help me find a job. I buried myself in my books during every free moment, desperate to prove I wasn't useless. I felt like I was making real progress. And when the thought of applying to college first entered my mind, the entire Shaw family shut it down. They said if I didn't get in, it would be a waste. And if I did get in, who would take care of Ethan's grandparents, cook and do the laundry? To them, a girl from the countryside didn't need much education. At the time, I was completely dependent on them. Even Ethan believed that honoring one's parents came first. I had no choice but to lower my head. But once I had gained a little knowledge, I couldn't help craving more. Over the years that followed, even though people laughed at me for pretending to be smart, the books in the Shaw household were my only source of comfort. With those memories of learning, I knew in this life I could rely on myself. Right now, it wasn't yet mandatory to have a degree to register for college entrance exams. As long as I signed up, I could take the test. It was autumn now, and I had until next summer, nearly a year to prepare. Although my parents didn't fully understand why I was suddenly so driven, they supported me completely. After thinking it over, I prepared some dates and walnuts to sell at the town market. We already had the walnuts and dates, and I just needed to buy some honey from the beekeepers next door at a neighborly discount. I mixed up about half a sackful at home. The first time I tried to sell them, it didn't go very well at first. But once people tasted it and found it good, everything sold out. The price was lower than I'd hoped. This was a small town after all, and people were reluctant to spend much. Still, my mom was thrilled. After all, we only earned about 40 yuan a year. Making 6 yuan in one day was enough to feed our whole family for 2 or 3 months. After buying some groceries with Mom and heading home, I felt like the sky had suddenly collapsed. Ethan Shaw was standing right there, in our courtyard. The mud brick wall around our yard wasn't high, and from a distance, I could already see the back of someone's head. When Mom saw the man standing there, she thought I was blushing because I'd spotted a stranger. Ethan turned around, and when he saw me, his eyes lit up. That scumbag. He had always been the type to get ideas just from looking. In my last life, it was because of my striking looks and curvy figure that people gossiped and said I had seduced Ethan. That's how I ended up marrying into the Shaw family. But the truth was, it was him who came after me. I ignored him and walked straight into the house with our groceries. Dad was in the middle of plucking feathers from a pigeon. Seeing me, he beamed and told me he had caught one for Officer Shaw as a tonic. He added that Ethan was already a leader at such a young age and would be leaving tomorrow. I finally breathed a sigh of relief. In my last life, he'd stayed for nearly a month before leaving. This time it looked like it would be much quicker. The village had loudspeakers everywhere, and word spread fast. Every uncle and aunt who passed by wanted to peek inside after hearing a man had visited our house. I used the excuse that I'd made plans to have dinner at my friend Lily's house next door, gave Ethan a brief nod in passing, and left right away. That's when I learned the village chief really didn't have a daughter at home anymore. But once his married daughter from the next village heard the story, she brought her younger sister-in-law home with her. The moment that girl saw Ethan, with his polished appearance and confident presence, she threw a fit, demanding to marry him. Ethan didn't seem interested. Coincidentally, my dad happened to stop by. Ethan said he wanted to thank him and asked to come over to our place. So my dad brought him back home. Thank him. More like using that as an excuse to have dad cook for him. How shameless. I stayed out until almost dark before finally returning home, figuring he must have left by then. But as fate would have it, I ran into him on the road. His voice suddenly rang out from the side of the path in the darkness, and I jumped like I'd seen a ghost. I instinctively turned to run and almost tripped over a tree branch. Ethan reacted quickly and caught me just in time. I muttered a quick thanks and tried to leave, but he called out to me asking, "Are you avoiding me?" I was, but of course I couldn't say that. "You're overthinking it," I said. "We don't even know each other. It's just that in the countryside, gossip spreads fast. I don't want people getting the wrong idea, that's all." Ethan looked at me like he half believed what I was saying. Then he hesitated and asked how I'd found his badge. So my dad had told him everything apparently. The snap button on the inside pocket of Ethan's jacket was actually very secure. It was hard to believe the badge just fell out. I brushed it off. I accidentally touched it and just pulled it out to look. What if I had saved a spy or something? He could tell I was losing patience, but he also couldn't argue with my logic. These days you really couldn't be too careful. There were plenty of shady types around. He said it was dark and offered to walk me home. I turned him down. I was used to walking country roads at night. Ethan left quickly this time. Before he went, though, he came by our house one last time. He told my dad thanks for bringing him here. Then he looked at me and said that if I really wanted to go to college, he could take me to the capital. There were better resources there. And even if I didn't get in, he could help me find a good job. That's when I knew for sure Ethan was only interested in me because he thought I was pretty. Otherwise, why didn't he offer the same opportunity to the village chief's sister-in-law, who had practically thrown herself at him? I gave my dad a sharp look. At this rate, we might as well let Ethan decide how we spent the few cents we had too. I hadn't even officially decided to apply to college yet. I'd only mentioned it offhand to Dad. "Don't trouble yourselves," I said. "I don't even know if I'll go through with it." Maybe Ethan was starting to get annoyed with how many times I'd turned him down. He didn't say anything else. Sure enough, the village chief soon came by with a suggestion. Why didn't Ethan take the chief's daughter's sister-in-law to the city and help her find a job? It didn't necessarily have to be about marriage. As long as she could get out of the mountains and marry someone decent, it was better than being stuck here forever. These days, just having a connection could change your fate. No one could resist that kind of opportunity. I wasn't an exception in my past life either. I heard later that Ethan had mentioned taking me to the capital, and the chief's daughter took every chance she got to mock me for it. That's how it worked in the countryside. News as small as a sesame seed could spread to the whole village in no time. My parents were kind, but when people asked, they didn't think much of it and just spilled everything. After seeing me make a little money, other villagers started copying me, selling dates and walnuts too. But there wasn't any real secret to it. The town was small, and once too many people started selling the same thing, it stopped being profitable. Nothing was easy to make money from these days. Our house was far from town, and anything else was hard to sell. Seeing me worried day in and day out made my parents feel just as helpless. We weren't starving, but northern villages were so isolated that starting a business required big upfront costs. And anything that didn't require much capital, well, once others copied it, it became useless fast. Even if I wanted to stick with it, it would be a headache in the long run. So I simply bought some practice books and started working through them at home. If I couldn't save money, I'd study hard. And once I got to the city, I could earn slowly. Time passed quickly. As New Year approached, my aunt came back to visit with my cousin and uncle-in-law. Our family was simple. Dad was an only child, and when Mom was 12, she'd brought my aunt along with her and somehow ended up here. My aunt had left home after middle school to find work and got married in the city. Every couple of years, she'd come back to visit us. My cousin wasn't much into studying. He dropped out after high school and was working in a factory. He only found something stable last year. When he saw me studying, he found it a bit strange. He didn't really understand much, but he complimented my handwriting. When he heard from my parents that I was preparing for college, he immediately offered to help find me some materials and send them back through someone. My aunt and uncle-in-law kept praising me for having ambition. After they left, the materials my cousin promised didn't show up. But Ethan made a grand gesture instead. He sent a bunch of things to the village. A soldier came by carrying a box and left it at our house. He said it was a thank you gift from Ethan Shaw for saving his life. Inside the box, half was filled with study materials. The rest contained 2 rolls of fabric, some snow cream for girls, and a sealed envelope. The envelope had 300 yuan inside. My parents were shocked. The letter inside said it was the new year and suggested we use the money to make clothes. The fabrics were clearly in colors women would like. I couldn't help being on guard with Ethan again. Dad asked me to write a thank you letter in return. So I did. I wrote that we were grateful for Officer Shaw's contributions to the village, and that I would share the study materials with others. As for the rest of the items, I said I'd already taken them to town and sold them for quite a bit. That money alone would be enough to keep our whole family stable for years. I was truly grateful. I had no idea what kind of expression Ethan Shaw had on his face when he got my letter. In my last life, he'd never made such a big show of things. Sure, my dad had saved him, and this much was already more than enough to repay the favor. It felt so good not having to constantly worry about scraping together money. But what didn't feel so great was how it seemed like the entire village had started targeting my family. I didn't let it bother me too much. One day in town, I spotted an address for submitting stories to Northern Wind Literature printed in the newspaper. I thought I'd give it a try. I submitted 2 short stories I had written in secret. And to my surprise, I actually got a reply. They accepted them and paid me 12 yuan as a manuscript fee, encouraging me to send more. It was true what they said about big cities being full of opportunity. If you had the ability and could connect with the right people, the money would follow. So I kept studying and writing at the same time, gradually shifting into longer-form stories and submitting them regularly. When my editor found out I was planning to apply to college, she mailed me a bunch of study materials, better than the ones Ethan had sent. My parents didn't know how much money I was actually earning. They just thought I was doing some casual writing here and there. In my heart, I was already planning that once I got into college, I'd study for a couple of years and then bring my parents to the capital with me. I'd make sure they had regular health checkups. If I worked hard enough, maybe I could even buy a traditional courtyard house while they were still affordable. If I could manage it, I'd buy a few properties. 10 or 15 years down the line, I'd be considered wealthy. News that I was preparing for college spread like wildfire through the village. Most people assumed I was still hung up on Ethan and wanted to go to the capital to chase after him. It was ridiculous. Everyone was just waiting to watch me fall on my face. People would pass by our house just to mutter sarcastic comments. Even my parents got dragged into it. Neighbors joked that we were rats trying to pretend to be phoenixes. A few women even said that I had a seductive look about me. And if I got lucky and got into college, I could marry some high-ranking official. Even if I didn't get in, they said, just having an education would help me land a good husband in town or the county seat. According to them, men liked girls like me. Just look at how the men in our village stared. My mom nearly got into a few fights with those gossiping women. As the exam drew closer, the worry on my parents' faces grew deeper. On one hand, they feared all my hard work might come to nothing. On the other hand, they were already dreading the thought of me leaving home if I did get accepted. My parents were gentle, peace-loving people. Even if others were nasty to them, unless it crossed the line, they'd endure it in silence. Ethan Shaw was the only exception to that. After I returned from taking the exam in the county, more and more people started showing up at our doorstep every day. Some came to pry. Some came just to catch a glimpse of the girl who thought she could turn into a phoenix and fly out of the mud. That's when I made a decision. I wasn't going to wait until I'd been in college for a couple of years. The moment the results were released, I was going to take my parents with me to the capital. The large bills Ethan had given us were still untouched. And in the past 6 months, I'd earned 2 more large bills from my writing. Prices weren't outrageous back then. Renting a place only cost 60 or 70 yuan a year. If my mom bought a sewing machine, she could make clothes and earn money. My dad had a real talent for cooking. He was always tinkering with wild game he caught. If he apprenticed in a kitchen for 2 years with 1 or 200 yuan, we could open a small restaurant. Within a few years, I might even become the kind of rich girl people dreamed of. When I told my parents all this, they thought I was talking nonsense. Mom said every housewife knew how to sew. Who would pay for homemade clothes? Dad admitted he was pretty good at cooking. In the village, people even invited him to cook for funerals and weddings. But how could his cooking compare to the professionals in big cities? I wanted to tell Mom that cities had already started selling ready-made clothes. And I wanted to tell Dad that in my last life, because of the Shaws, I'd eaten in many restaurants, and hardly any were better than the food he made. Even with our limited ingredients in the village, he could cook amazing meals. But if I said all that, they'd probably think I'd gone crazy. I stood there silent as Ethan's words hung in the air. If I really wanted to go to college, he could take me to the capital. I almost laughed. He thought he was offering me something I wanted, that he was the key to my future. But the truth was, he was the very thing I was running from. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time since he'd stumbled into my life again, I didn't feel anger. Not even bitterness. Just clarity. "No," I said simply. "Thank you. But I don't need your help." His eyebrows lifted, surprised. "You don't even know where to start." "I can. I've already started," I cut in. "Without you. And I'll finish it the same way." He opened his mouth to say something else, but I turned and walked away before he could. I didn't owe him an explanation. Not this time. In the days that followed, I kept working, writing, studying, saving. My parents didn't understand why I suddenly seemed so sure of myself, but they didn't stop me. They just watched, quietly, as I moved with a purpose I'd never had before. When the acceptance letter came, I held it in my hands like a treasure. I hadn't just gotten into college. I'd gotten a scholarship, one based on my writing, not on connections, not on favors, on my own work. I packed my things quietly the night before we left. My parents were still in disbelief that we were really moving to the capital, that we'd be starting over, not because of someone else's kindness, but because I'd made it happen. As we boarded the train, I glanced back one last time. The village was fading behind us, its gossip, its narrow roads, its painful memories. All of it. And with it, Ethan Shaw. He'd tried to be my fate once. But this time I chose my own. And as the train pulled forward, I smiled for the first time in a long time. Because I wasn't chasing anyone. I was finally going home, to the life I'd built with my own hands.